Thank you very much, Compactors Youth Choir. A lovely rendition. Please be seated. Today, 18th of January 2023, marks the 20th anniversary of the 2003 bushfires here in the ACT. It can be best described as a watershed moment for the ACT community, its emergency services and the ACT government. On this day in 2003, a combination of extreme weather conditions caused multiple bushfires that were burning the Kosciuszko and Namadgi national parks to merge and impact Canberra's southwestern suburbs, right where we are now. This is a difficult day for many people across the ACT community, particularly those who lost loved ones, treasured pets, and their family homes. For many of us, it was the most significant events we will ever encounter. Our emergency services personnel work tirelessly to protect those around them. Directly or indirectly, they provide support to help firefighting efforts on the ground and to our community. Today, many will stop and remember, while others will prefer not to. That is a personal choice for everyone, and whatever decision people make, it is completely understandable. And if you need to take a moment and step away from today's ceremony, please do so. If you need assistance after today's ceremony, do not hesitate to access support services available to you, such as employer counselling programs, colleagues, friends, and family who can provide support to you. It has been 20 years, and while we are better prepared than ever for a bushfire emergency, it could happen again. Crippling drought, multiple lightning strikes, scorching temperatures, such as we experienced in the 2019-20 fires, has proven this. Together, we must learn from this tragic disaster to ensure that we are better prepared for the next disaster, not only as a government, not only as emergency services, but also as a community. It is my pleasure now to welcome the Minister for Police and Emergency Services, Mick Gentleman, to provide the official address. Thank you, Minister.
Well, thank you very much, and it is nice to join you all here this evening. Can I welcome everybody that's attending this solemn ceremony this evening. Can I too acknowledge we're meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians, and I respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to life in this area. And can I thank William for his very kind welcome to country. Can I acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, many from ACT Parliament, but also from the Federal Parliament. Katie Gallagher, good to see you here. And can I also acknowledge the passing of the Canberra artist and educator Tess Horwitz on Monday. As many of you will know, Tess was one of the three artists responsible for the design of the ACT Bushfire Memorial where we stand today. Tess worked with the community to bring this memorial to life, and she invested in being in place, a place of comfort and peace as the years went by. Just recently, using her original design drawings as a reference, Tess provided advice to ACT government on the new plantings in preparation for this event today. So thank you, Tess, for your extraordinary contribution to life in Canberra through your artistic practice. You will be greatly missed. My deepest condolences to Tess's partner and creative collaborator, Tony Steele, and their extended families. Can also note the passing of Tony Graham, who was our Chief SES officer just recently. Of course, he was on the ground during the 2003 fires. Today marks the 20th anniversary of the 2003 bushfires, a day that Canberra and the nation will never forget. 20 years ago, devastating fires burned approximately 160,000 hectares of precious land, destroying over 480 homes and several ACT landmarks, including Mount Stromlo Observatory. On this day, we tragically lost 4 community members, and I'd like to express my deepest sympathies to their family and friends today as we remember them. A combination, as you've heard, of extreme weather conditions caused multiple bushfires that had been burning in the Kosciuszko and Namadgi National Parks to merge and impact Canberra's southwestern suburbs, where we are standing today. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a day of reflection to remember the lives that were lost, the homes and properties that were destroyed, and those that were displaced by this devastating disaster. We know that for many, today is a hard day, and we stand with all of those who experienced trauma from this tragic event. The response efforts at the time were incredible, and I once again thank all of the volunteers and staff who were involved in 2003 and supported the Canberra community to recover in the years that followed. Many of the responders from 2003 still wear their service uniforms proudly, committing their time to responding in the darkest of hours when our community needs them the most. During this disaster and the recovery period, Canberrans showed incredible resilience, strength, and community spirit. We lent on each other, helped one another, and together rebuilt. We became united through hardship, and 20 years on, it fills me with pride to see the community still banded together. Together, we have learnt a lot from 2003. These lessons, although they come from harrowing times, have helped us improve emergency and government services for the future. We collectively are better prepared for bushfire emergency than ever before. Our policies, warning systems, operational technology and capabilities, and governance arrangements lead emergency management practice on a national level. We have come a long way, but we'll never forget. So I hope you have the chance tonight to reflect on these events. I'd like to finish by thanking all those involved in the response and recovery effort that continues to this day. It is your dedication and commitment that helps keep our community safe every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Can I please now welcome our next speaker, Chief Officer of the ACT Rural Fire Service, Rowan Scott, to tell his story and experience through the 2003 Canberra bushfires.
Thanks, AJ. Good evening, everyone, those that are here in person and joining us online. Having personally been in this exact location 20 years ago, I feel very privileged and honoured to be able to represent the members of the ACT Rural Fire Service as we remember the devastating 2003 Canberra firestorm. Following the 2003 fires, a way to heal and to record our history, members of the ACT Rural Fire Service produced a book which featured stories and photos that the volunteers captured during that 2003 fire campaign. The book was titled, "What You Wouldn't Believe." This title couldn't be closer to the truth. It was a true description of what everyone experienced on the January the 18th, and unless you were in the ACT, trying to explain exactly what happened is very difficult to put into words and actually get the experience of what we're dealing with. The 2003 fires were of a magnitude and severity never experienced previously in the ACT or Australia. Day turned into night as thick smoke turned the sky pitch black. The heat was unbearable. The noise of the fire was unforgettable. No matter what your location, rural or suburbia, it felt like it was raining fire in all directions. I, like many others, felt fear and was extremely concerned for family, friends, and my firefighting peers. Today is a time to reflect and remember the 4 individuals that lost their lives and the impacts on the community with the loss of nearly 500 houses. Whilst we do need to acknowledge and remember the loss, there are many positives that actually have followed from this destructive fire emergency. The real ACT community spirit came forward during this challenging time, and all parts of the community rallied together to help those affected by the fires in any means possible. Neighbours helping neighbours, strangers helping strangers. This display of kindness, resilience and camaraderie is still incredibly strong and active in our community and has not diminished over the 20 years, and the recent pandemic is evidence of that. Canberra is our home, and we choose to live here to enjoy the vast areas of native bush and open rural lands. We do this because we live in the bush capital. Fire will always be a part of our lives. Our landscape is prone to fire, but working together, we can remain safe whilst enjoying our bush setting. Following the fires, there was financial investment from government, we had lessons learnt and advancements in technology. The ACT is better prepared and resourced to respond to the next large-scale fire that may impact the ACT. The risk of another 2003 fire event impacting the community has been reduced. We have implemented new legislation, the establishment of the Emergency Services Agency, robust planning and estate and building codes, asset protection zones, increased firefighting capability and aviation assets, timely and accurate fire detection, fire prediction and fuel modelling, nationally consistent community messaging and education programs, improved use of communication and technology, and the ACT Rural Fire Service has actually implemented a lot of those recently with some other investments following the 2019-2020 fire season. The fire service also in the community work together, and we can't become complacent. We need to continue to invest, react to climate impacts, and work together, always looking for ways to improve on how we collectively can continue to prepare and protect ourselves and the territory from the impact of fire. All emergency services personnel that responded to the 2003 fires gave everything they had to protect our community. Despite their efforts, many felt they had failed and let our community down. Firefighters on the 18th of January experienced a history-changing and incredibly intense fire event, and standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the fire front on, the majority of these firefighters involved on the 18th were volunteers drawn from our own local community. This volunteer workforce continues to serve and protect our community from bushfires. As the lead service for bushfires, the ACT RFS, predominantly volunteer-based, is made up of a very diverse group of individuals and complemented by the Parks and Conservation Service employees. The service's volunteer membership represents the demographic of our territory, and the members want nothing more than protect and serve their community. ACT RFS and the volunteer membership will continue to do this over the next 20 years and lead into the next whatever climate change may bring. Volunteers willingly make themselves available to support the community all day, every day, year round. The RFS volunteers devote a tremendous amount of their own personal time to going training, community education and engagement events, and for incident response. The RFS volunteers contributed over 40,000 hours on fire incidents during the 1920 fire season. Each volunteer brigade, of which there are 8, has a very distinct family feel, and despite their various backgrounds, all members are united in their firefighting efforts. Volunteers never think twice when there is a request to respond to a fire incident or assist other emergency services. Volunteers regularly place themselves in harm's way to protect life, property, and the environment. Volunteers often miss key personal moments, dropping everything to respond to that next call out. The support provided to the ACT from volunteers is also backed up by family, friends, and the employees of those. This is critical for the success of the ACT RFS, and they too need to be recognised and acknowledged for their continued support and sacrifice to the volunteering. RFS volunteers are highly skilled, a professional workforce who have adapted to the changing fire environment over the past 20 years. The depth and experience that precedes 2003 with a high number of members still active, and the post-2003 fire generation have continued to protect the community whilst maintaining our strong service culture and history. All members are extremely proud to say that they volunteer with the ACT RFS protecting the ACT community. Please spare some time today in your reflections to think about the firefighters and their families for their ongoing dedication, professionalism in protecting the ACT and surrounding regions and the experiences they had 2003. So thank you for everyone for coming out and we appreciate your support.
Thank you, Chief Officer Scott. Can I also now welcome our next speaker, the ACT Fire and Rescue Chief Officer, Matthew Mavety, to tell his story and reflections on the 2003 Canberra bushfires.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us to commemorate the January 2003 fires and cast our minds back. Firstly, I want to give my condolences to the family and friends of Tony Graham, who passed away yesterday. He will be missed, and he was an absolute gentleman. Today means many things to many different people. Each person will feel today differently and experience today differently. I won't presume to speak for other people, but I will speak for myself and the service that I lead. I was a young firefighter on the back of a truck on this day 20 years ago, and it wasn't a good day out. It was challenging, in some ways soul-destroying, and at times terrifying. Notably for me, there was a sense of failure, as Rose touched on, and when ACT Fire Brigade at the time felt that we hadn't protected the community. I won't discuss the details of the day because despite standing side by side with other fireys and members of the community, we all experienced that day differently, and we continue to, I guess I would say. And really words are inadequate to describe what happened on that day. Ray did a pretty good job though, well done mate. I guess that's why we remember and reflect. My approach has been to look forward. It's looking to the future. It's in part to make sense of the events of that day, and it's in part to implement the hard-won lessons of that day. There were terrible impacts, there was terrible loss, but we are the better for it. I make no judgments about how others approach their grief and how their journey to acceptance occurs. For me, it's about how far we have come and what we have learned. Initially, I'd like to reflect on resilience. Australia is a harsh continent and it's shaped by fire, flood and storm. There are other natural disasters too, but they're the main forms that we experience. The continent has evolved and its occupants have evolved in its presence. So despite these challenges, our First Nations people have lived, thrived and survived for millennia in the harsh but beautiful environment that is our country. That knowledge and wisdom has been hard won and has changed and evolved with the changing situation and circumstances and with the passage of time. And I'd like to follow that approach of iterative learning and improvement. The model of resilience and adaptability that represents to me puts me in awe. I'd encourage people to consider the benefits of accepting that which is beyond our control and focusing where possible on shaping the things we can influence. And that's what we have sought to do in the wake of those fires and every other disaster or emergency event that we've experienced since. We in ACT Fire and Rescue have reconciled this knowledge to a degree with, that we've learned from 2003 fires. We consistently demonstrate the application and the attributes of respect and dignity for the community in their darkest hour, in their hardest time, and we consistently meet people on the hardest day of their life. So taking that learning forward is a really important process for us so that we can be better into the future. I acknowledge that no arrangements are perfect, nothing should remain static. ACT Fire and Rescue are constantly evaluating how we can do better. Natural disasters will always occur, again as Ro alluded to, they are our constant companion. It's how we manage them, it's how we recover from them, it's how we learn from them that is key for me. Our leadership team, or Fire and Rescue's leadership team, all served on that day 20 years ago. So the impact and the aftermath of the 2003 fires is alive in their memory and in their thought processes, and that informs that wisdom and knowledge is passed down like song lines to our new firefighters, to the huge number of recruits we've been inviting into the Fire and Rescue in the recent past. We're sharing that knowledge. We are the better for it. They are the better for it. And the ACT community are the recipients of that knowledge. From these lessons, our service can continue business as usual as well as responding to emergencies. And I think the best evidence of that is the recent 1920 fire season, where despite the huge fires around us, despite the business as usual, despite the smoke inundation, we still responded seamlessly to some close-in fires in Beard and Pielago in particular that were so close to the built environment that we had to react quickly, effectively and decisively. And my belief is that we demonstrated that with alacrity. And that was done in partnership with our fellow responders from Parks and the Rural Fire Service. So those paid and volunteer always stand side by side to make the sun come out for someone who's having a bad day. Some may disagree with how far we've come, and I respect their opinions. As I said, nothing is static and nothing is beyond review. I just respectfully disagree from my intimate knowledge of the service that I love and the people that I work with. So for today, some will be transported back 20 years and it may not be a pleasant journey. I can assure you that my service and my firefighters are tirelessly striving for improvement and they're seeking the best outcome for the ACT community. The ACT Fire and Rescue volunteers and paid staff are committed to protecting their community as we were back in 2003. We're just a little bit more streetwise, a little bit more technically adept. We always seek ways to evolve and improve and learn, and sometimes you have to suffer a bit of a hiding to take away the lessons. So I know today's difficult for many. I do wish you well on your journey, and thank you for attending and remembering this day. Yara.
Thank you, Chief Officer Mavety, and for those reflections and learnings. I'd now like to welcome the Compactors Youth Choir to sing This Heart, a Tebe poem. Thank you, Compactors Youth Choir. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Professor Rick McRae, to come and tell his story and reflections on the 2003 bushfires.
Hello, this is a remarkable day for Canberra and in particular the Western Creek community. 20 years ago we saw things that none of us ever expected to see. Canberra's emergency managers, every one of us, felt uniquely helpless on that day. Despite our best efforts, despite our training, despite our equipment, we lost over 500 homes in one afternoon. 4 lives were lost and hundreds injured. The subsequent inquiries sought to direct blame. If we had the people, if we had the training, if we had the equipment, why was the outcome so bad? It had to be someone at fault. The loose ends were never brought together. Many involved in that day were left in limbo. How could that have happened, they asked themselves, still to this day. I've heard them ask this in recent years in Sydney, in Launceston, and in Canada. I was planning officer in the incident management team. I'm also a scientist. I kicked off a scientific endeavour that is still going strong today. Having retired recently from ESA, I'm now an adjunct professor at UNSW Canberra, a local campus with a legacy of bushfire science spanning many decades. We discovered the major cause of damaging blow-up fires globally by looking at fire behaviour around Mount Corrie. We discovered the first ever fire tornado event, an F2 tornado that ran from Mount Corrie to Canberra. We've worked with collaborators overseas on many things. Low oxygen burning produced purple flames and surface flows of ember storms, seen by many on the edge of Western Creek. After being contacted by the US Naval Research Laboratories in Washington, DC, we focused on fire thunderstorms. 20 years ago, these clouds, called pyro-CBs for short, were a rarity in Australia. In 3 hours, we saw vast pyro-CBs from the Broken Cart Fire, from the Stockyard Spur Fire, from the Bendora Fire, and from the McIntyre's Hut Fire. This was close to the most intense fire activity ever recorded globally. We saw a black sky in the afternoon. We saw pyrogenic lightning. We saw black hail. If a fire is doing things new to science, if a fire is disrupting 15,000 cubic kilometres of the atmosphere and being photographed by astronauts in the International Space Station, if a fire has a power equal to almost half of the then global electricity generating power, if a fire is releasing energy equivalent to the 1989 Newcastle earthquake, then you cannot do much with a crude fleet of fire trucks, however well resourced. The 2003 fires validated the nuclear winter hypothesis. What was novel in Australia in 2003 has now happened in Eastern Australia in 2006, in 2009, and during Black Summer many times, as well as in Tasmania and in Western Australia. What was seen by the coroner as outcomes arising from operational failures in 2003 is now becoming normal due to climate change. We came perilously close to a repeat right here in early February 2020. Had the rain been delayed by a week, the outcome may have been inevitable and unthinkable. The novelty of what we went through in 2003 has been experienced afresh in recent years in Portugal, in Bolivia, and in Kazakhstan. There's a compelling case that our 2003 fires are the most scientifically important wildfires ever, producing learnings of global importance. From that perspective, the 18th of January 2003 is a day that we should remember as the day when over 1,000 homes were saved from an unimaginable fire by our emergency services and by our community working together. The tragic losses must be remembered and learned from, but we Canberrans, along with the rest of the planet, are facing unimaginable climate change impacts, and we must get onto the front foot to adapt to this. This memorial is a fitting foundation for us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor McRae, for those reflections and global learnings as well. I'd like to welcome Mr. Tony Greep to come to the stage as well as our volunteer speaker from the ACT Rural Fire Service.
Thanks, AJ. I've been asked to reflect on my experiences on the 18th of January 2003, and I must admit, thinking back of that time has brought back a lot of emotions of the events on both on and off the fireground through that period. The lead up to the 2002-03 fire season was very similar to the 2001 and 2 fire season, which we knew was going to be very hot and very dry seasons. As a service, we faced the 2001 Christmas fires in the previous season, so we felt prepared as a service going into this season. But as we all know, the 2002-03 was something very different. The memorial you saw as your way in shows how it all began on the 8th of January 2003 with lightning strikes from a dry thunderstorm, igniting 5 locations to the west of the ACT. Many of us here turned out each day to assist to try and contain these fires, which were smoke plumes on the horizon and not in the city like in 2001. Although not impacting the city, the Canberra Times followed the fires from day one with a very small article in the middle of the paper, which grew in size each day and closer to the front of the paper as the fires got bigger. The fire mainly stayed in the Bindabellas, but on the 17th of January, it made a big run from the west towards Canberra. Crews were arranged that evening for the next day, and come the morning of the 18th, it was a very eerie feeling. As we arrived before 7 a.m. at our respective sheds for the new day's shift, it was already very hot. And due to the smoke haze, the sunlight and the shadows had that real yellow tinge about it. You just knew that there was a bushfire close by. Heading down to our meeting place in Lanyon for our morning's briefing and deployments, everything felt very still, but it didn't stay that way for long. On the 18th, all crews were deployed to various locations to the west of the Canberra suburbs to work on different fires due to the events from the 17th. I was deployed into Tidbinbilla area on the Paddy Rivers Road fire with a number of trucks and various volunteer sheds, parks and forestry brigades. Our role was to protect 8 farms and the tracking station down there. By mid-morning, we were positioned and ready to protect the nominated assets. Being farm locations, more often than not, they nominated their machinery sheds, then their own homes to be protected first. As the morning went on, we noticed the temperature quickly rising, the wind started to pick up, the black leaves started to rain down, the sun turned blood red, and the sky went black, and then all hell broke loose. The crews fought valiantly that day. There was so much fire, there were so many near misses, and thankfully so many saves. But no matter how exhausted we were, we just kept going, and sadly so did the fire. There was just so much of it. It come in from the west, rolled over the top of us, burned every piece of grass that we could see, and kept going into Canberra. Our radio communications were close to failure, with only limited messages coming through. So after checking all the crews I had down in Tid, we managed to save most of the structures that were nominated. Sadly, a lot of animals were not so lucky. So my team of 5 trucks were broken up and sent to various different fires around the ACT. Myself and 2 trucks were deployed into Glenlock Interchange, just on the southern border of Belconnen. Due to the radios not working, we had really no idea of how it impacted the Canberra suburbs. Driving into town through Point Out Crossing in the Gordon Lanyon area, then heading up on Drake Fockwood Drive, and then on the Tuggeran Parkway heading towards Belconnen, we started to realise what the impact was. Canberra looked like what I imagine a war zone looked like. Once at Glenlock, I was in charge of putting the grader line 20 metres wide around the western and southern edges of Belconnen. Hearing about the fires of the 18th from other crews who were in different locations and seeing the full extent of the before and after photos of suburbs over the coming days really hit home to the level of destruction. Sadly, there were 4 deaths and we lost over 5 other homes in the Duffy, Chapman and Holder areas. With the help from Interstate 8 fire agencies, the Australian Defence Force, we continue to assist with the fires for the next 3 weeks. Many members who assisted felt a level of guilt for what we'd lost on the 18th. But with the support of the Canberra community, helped our healing, some of whom brought food and drinks to the shed each day, some even come up and swept out the sheds as their way of saying thank you. I remember people writing messages on posters in Civic that were later donated to brigades, and the positive message from the ACT community who wrote about their experiences and thanking us for our efforts also helped us come to terms with this day 20 years ago. Although we had guilt for what we had lost, we also had appreciation for what we'd achieved and how much we had saved. Over the years, I've watched the greater scar around Belconnen slowly fade and the effective suburbs rebuild. And I'd like to think that we have recovered. 20 years on, I'd like to pay my respects to the ACT community and all the operational support and recovery agencies with their efforts and goodwill and resilience shown in 2003. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for those particularly very familiar reflections and experiences from 2003. I'd also like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Simon Butt from ACT Parks and Conservation Service, to reflect as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to pay my respects to the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to recognise the family and friends of those who passed away during the fires. In emergency management, we speak of protecting 3 things: life, property and the environment. My time this evening will be talking about the environment. This memorial sits on what was Stromlo Forest. It is an example of the changes in land use since the fires of 2003. Change is what comes to mind after 2003. It is before and after, and it is a marker in our consciousness. For so many in land management, the change has been profound. Working to recovers after the fires, land management staff, 3 things were happening at the same time. First, we were trying to cope with the personal grief. Many of us had lost homes, cars, some had lost work buildings, and all of us had lost job security. No one knew what the future held for us. Many of us working in and around the Western Creek area felt uncomfortable even going into the shops in our uniforms for years after. It was as if we had let you down. I know that that feeling has returned to many in the lead up to this anniversary. Second, we were working hard to assist the environment in its recovery. For our nature reserves and the Madju National Park, this meant defining the damage, working out how to repair and rebuild, while still conserving what was left and stopping the soil erosion that could affect our water catchment. Sadly, this is a job that many of us are doing now for a second time. Forestry also had a large recovery job ahead of it. 13,000 hectares of commercial pine plantation was lost in one day. It took 12 months to harvest all of the damaged timber. Timber was salvaged, train loads were sent to Port Kembla so they could be shipped to the Middle East. Working with local sawmills, much of the timber was used in the constructions of homes destroyed in the fires. Fire crews were then called to put into practice their skills with over 60 kilometres of windrows needing to be burnt. This provided soil and ash beds so planting could reoccur. Third, preparing to do our job better. With the implementation of the Emergencies Act in 2004, all land managers were required to ensure that the land they manage met the standards set out in the Strategic Bushfire Management Plan, the SBMP. We all love an acronym. Since then, the SBMP has been revised 3 times and work is now underway to produce the 5th version. Each time we improve our ability to manage the risk of fires to the Territory. We now have detailed 10-year regional fire management plans. These plans are developed with input from a variety of people. These RFMPs inform our annual bushfire operations plan. This is the work that the Parks and Conservation Service does each year in consultation with and approval from ESA to reduce the risk of fires. Over the last week, even yesterday, many will have seen smoke in the air as crews undertook prescribed burns. This is only a small part of the almost 700 tasks that we undertake each year. Earlier today, and out of sight of the public, many people involved in the 2003 fires gathered just down the road to reconnect and support each other. Marked by raw emotion, the support of each other born through adversity still stands. Stories such as a 20-tonne fire truck being blown from one side of the road to the other, telling staff that their vehicles and homes were destroyed, or delivering the news that some were blessed as both their cars and homes were safe. These stories flowed freely. Mostly, it was a chance to pause and reflect on all that has happened since. The Parks and Conservation Service maintains over 160 fire-trained personnel. We have sent staff to every state in Australia, internationally to the USA and Canada on a total of 8 occasions, all the time gaining skills and experience that we can bring back to the ACT while sharing our expertise with others in their time of need. In the 20 years since the fires, I've been fortunate to work with 2 amazing groups of land managers at ACT Forest and the ACT Parks and Conservation Service, all while volunteering with my second family at the Gungahlin Rural Fire Brigade. It is these amazingly committed people who strive day after day to ensure our community should never have to suffer the losses of 2003 again that I will think of today. And I hope you might take some time to think of them also. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. We're now going to move to an opportunity for some formal commemoration and some personal commemoration for people. I'd now like to invite Minister Gilliman, Minister Berry, Minister Steele, Commissioner Whelan, Chief Officers Scott and Mavety, Rick, Simon, Tony and William Tompkins to plant a tree on this site to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the 2003 Canberra bushfires, and that will be just up to our right. While the tree is being planted, I would also like to invite those who wish to lay a sprig of rosemary in the fountain to commemorate the events of 2003 to come forward to do so. This moment is for all of those who played a part, whether it be for the frontline workers, those behind the scenes, those who worked on the recovery effort, and for those in the community who all came together to assist in that time of need. Please feel free to come forward. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on for the service. Can I ask everyone please to stand while we observe a minute's silence to reflect and remember. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our piper. Please be seated. I would now like to invite our final speaker, ACT Emergency Services Agency Commissioner Georgina Whelan, to speak.
Thank you, Andrew. Yuma, as we come together this evening on our beautiful Ngunnawal country, I'd like to start by acknowledging what a sad week it has been for all of us. The 20th anniversary, the loss of Tess, a wonderful artist, the loss of a great leader in Tony Graham, and the loss of a volunteer in Senator Major General retired Jim Molan, a member of the Southern Brigade. I would like to acknowledge the partnership, the friendship and the support that we in the ESA receive from the ACT Public Service, and in particular calling out our siblings when we're in the fight, Parks and Conservation. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the Multi-Hazard Advisory Council, led by Dr. Sally Troy, and one of the longest serving members of that team, Dr. Tony Bartlett. for advising us, supporting us, and holding us to account. I would also like to recognise Commissioner Sophie Lewis, who leads our governance board that supports us and guides us and holds us to account. For we are a team that are held to account, and it's something that we are very proud of. You've heard from two remarkable, in fact, many speakers this evening, but two remarkable leaders in our chief officers, Rowan Scott and Matthew Mavety, sharing not only their lived experience, but demonstrating their resilience and longevity in now leading two of our services. I stand before you this evening, privileged to represent our agency. Our two chief officers, who you have not heard from this evening, that lead the paramedics, many of whom transitioned and supported those who we lost and who were injured in 2003 in Howard Red, and Chief Officer Anthony Drum, who leads our State Emergency Service, critical enablers and supporters not only in 2003, but also a very busy and committed volunteer service. Our two Assistant Commissioners and our executive team, who lead the critical enablers, the back of house that supports those on the front. We are humbled by the experience of those that have gone before us. We are respectful of a community to which the 2003 fires left an indelible mark on the lives of our community and the landscape on which we have the privilege of living. An agency that is committed to striving to be the best we can be for you, and forever grateful for the professional paid staff and the professional volunteers, the tens of hundreds of them, and emergency service personnel who at that time in 2003 put their own safety on the line to protect the lives and the properties of others. First responders, fatigued, traumatised and overwhelmed. They continued to go back into the threat then, and they continue to do so now, near and far, some 20 years later. And they do that because of the support of the community here across the ACT. The memories of 2003 are seared in our community's DNA. To the families and loved ones of those that were lost and injured, to those that lost their homes and their properties, and in some cases, their identity, to a community that was so deeply impacted by the events and the aftermath of 2003, and who have been with us here at Stromlo today and this evening, online or in spirit. We know your hearts have been broken since 2003, and we are truly blessed that you have been with us today. I wish to acknowledge that there are many people that don't want to be physically involved today, and that they may have their own way of remembering what happened and are privately reflecting on that. Please know you are in our hearts and our minds. This evening you have heard many, many wonderful recollections and also tributes to the 4 people who lost their lives, the hundreds who were injured, and the many more who lost their homes, and the first responders and staff who served our community at the time. The events of the 2003 bushfire were at the time deeply divisive, and today the effects are no less polarising. There has been no shortage of comments on the events of 2003 and its legacies from various points of views. and as mentioned by our two chief officers, they are all respected. Thousands of stories of loss, grief, and anger, and stories of courage, faith, generosity, and hope. But most importantly, what it means to be a community in the face of adversity. The fire was and remains the most prominent natural hazard event in our territory's history. We, as an agency, have not allowed it to drive, shape, or influence divisions. We have and will remain committed to a legacy of professional growth and commitment to service. Our grief is driven by loss and about failure. The ESA, born from the events and its aftermath, continue to seek to move forward, to listen and to learn, to remain relevant and reliable for our community in this ever-changing world. We have heard from many members of our community in the lead up to today and this evening, and we know healing takes a lifetime. A humane response to a very tragic situation and to those who experienced trauma, so publicly documented over the last 20 years, is a response that deserves compassion and empathy. And in the aftermath of such an event, our community deserves a capable, effective, and committed emergency response. Over the last 20 years, those that have gone before us and this generation of first responder will continue to strive to achieve this. That is our commitment to you. Every member of our emergency services agency, from the leadership through to our newest team members, the intergenerational family that is the ESA. We seek to uphold our values that were heavily influenced by the events of 2003 and its aftermath. In our memories, our grief, and in our renewal. Singularly, we will remain alone. Together, we are stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for those very considered and thoughtful words. On behalf of the ACT Government, thank you very much for your attendance both here and virtually, and to all who have contributed to the significant occasion. I'd also acknowledge, like some of the speakers already have, those past emergency service members, other volunteers, or members of the community who participated in responding to the fires or worked on the recovery effort that have since passed on in this time, or have provided their apologies tonight as they could not be here in person. Finally, for those here at the memorial, we invite you to take a walk down Memorial Lane where you can view photos reflecting the advancements and progression of the emergency services in the ACT since 2003. There's also an opportunity down there to enjoy some refreshment at the NCPC barbecue just beyond that Memorial Lane. Thank you once again. That concludes the service. And thank you for joining all of us tonight. Have a good night and safe travels home. Thank you.